I was approached about doing a documentary about the Chesapeake Bay because it's 40% dead and it has all those ecological issues. And so I gathered information and went, oh, this is really frightening. And I thought, I don't know, a documentary, I don't know if it's the way to go. But I began to think about it and said, well, look, I do tell stories. Why don't I take all the information and then weave it into the story so it would become more credible, and that information that floats out there seems credible and then frightening. And so it began to evolve that way.
And did you have one science guy that really hit you to these creatures?
We gathered a lot of stuff, and then, Mike, who wrote the screenplay, came upon the fact that the isopods, this parasite that moved from the Pacific to the Atlantic and has been, changing, and when we started to look into it, we went, holy God, it was truly frightening. So, oh, well, this is a nice element to bring into it. This is the next step into it. If you start playing with this, basically this, what the bay is, it's like a stew of disaster, and you bring that into it, you can play with it. So you have 85% factual information. It doesn't matter if you want to pay attention or not, it just adds a credibility to the piece. And so that's how it evolved.
You're the second high-profile filmmaker I've spoken to this month who's decided to go off the grid and do a found footage film, the first being Rob Burnett with We Made This Movie. The thing is, he decided to use a red cam and then gunk it up in post. I understand you decided to actually use the type of equipment that would generate it. In retrospect, good idea or not?
No, I think it was the best thing to do because it is 100%. We did the test by taking a high-end camera and degrading it. And I looked at it, still to me looks like a high-end camera that's degraded. To my eye, it didn't look real. And so we took about 100 and some cameras, and then we just kept testing them and projecting them and seeing what they do. And then out of that, we picked 20 some that seemed, all right, we'll use this. We'll use the Sony for underwater thing, for the, with the kids, and they can go under and whatever. We'll use this, we'll use the iPhone, and we just picked and choose. So we had this visual palette. And that, to me, became as real as you can make it, because it is real.
Was there any particular camera you got out into the field and discovered, and how did you work around
it?
Well,
the uh-ohs came from the fact that, for instance, if you take an iPhone and you're going to give it to someone to shoot something, you have no video playback, right? You can't see it at the time. So you can send the girl into the other room and tell her what to do and how to do the thing, and you have to get in another room because you'll be in the shot. And then afterwards, come back and you look at it and see, oh, that's good. Next time, can you go in there and do this, blah, blah, blah. And then a couple times with some of the actors, you go to look at it and there's no playback because they didn't hit the record.
That's why they're actors and not technicians, right?
And the other thing is, if you went to a red camera or one of those things, there's a difference between that camera and the consumer camera you hold in your hand. You can't hold the red camera the same way. It's subtle, and maybe some people, but to me, it's not, it didn't look real enough. When you see somebody grabs a camera from one person to another, exchanging a hand, you cannot do it with a bigger camera. So that's what we went with, and, you got to hold your breath initially because everybody was nervous about that idea, because you have to be very careful. You got to take that camera, you got to download the chip, you got to do all, because you can lose all this information. And so that's just a technical nonsense.
As far as the cast, you went with unknowns. What did you look for when you were casting? I mean, they all have professional experience, one even worked for you in the past. So what did you look for in the casting session?
Especially given that they were unknowns.
I'm looking for people that I just, that we can just believe as being as real as they can be. It's like, if you put Matt Damon in a role, then the whole movie goes out the window. He can be a great actor, but it tweaks the credibility. So you try to put together this group of people that seem like, oh, we found them. It's like when we talk about the movie, because I guess it falls into the found footage genre. But I never occurred to me about this found footage genre. I was thinking if a catastrophic event happened to a town, and there was no media, how would we know what happened? And because of all this, we'll now get an intimate look into a town and its people that we never would have had in the history of mankind. All this stuff gives an intimacy that never existed before. So Pompeii, you say, oh, Pompeii, but what was happening in two people in the street? What were they talking about? So that's what I was thinking about. So I mean, it sounds stupid and naive, but I wasn't thinking found footage. I was thinking, how do you document it? Sort of like it would be for anthropological or archaeological. How do you gather to see what the people were talking about? Because they're not all talking. They don't know what's going on. So that was what I was interested in.
The structure kind of reminded me of like citizen journalism, with the girl saying, "This is what I saw. This is what I was able to gather. I don't work for an accredited journalistic agency, but I'm doing this, putting it out there." Is this sort of a continuation of how you looked at how journalism tells stories in like Wag the Dog or Hollywood or Man of the Year even? Is that something you were thinking about when you were doing this, or did I just overread it?
No, I wasn't really thinking of it. I was thinking of if you had some intern, with a little thing who got most of the stuff incorrect and was caught up emotionally in it, because I was fascinated by the fact at the beginning, because I worked in news in the beginning, etc. And so you have to look at news as a professional and not get caught up in it. And she gets caught up in the emotional aspects of it, because that's where you are in the beginning. I thought, well, I'm just looking for the human behavior of it all. So the irony is that she stopped filming. She got so scared she couldn't even film anymore. I just liked the idea. She didn't even quite understand what was going on, and she couldn't make that step. So I was looking at the human dilemmas of it.
Following up on that, what I think made the film work better than a lot of the found footage films was the sort of overarching narration that she provided. So was that a conscious decision to sort of help tie it all together?
Yeah. I thought that I needed some connection, and I'm a bad student of film in terms of if I can apply this to that, and if I can do this to that, and so-and-so did this, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how to utilize it, but the one little thing that hovered in my head was, of all things, and we actually used the music for a moment, it was Our Town. Because in Our Town, the stage manager, he says, that's a young so-and-so, he died in World War I. I remember the first time he died in World War I. Now I'm going to watch the whole show, and he died in World War I. And there he is. So he's in it. So if you watch the movie in its own little subtlety, they're playing Our Town. Right. He says, all right, that's enough of that. People don't want to hear that music. That's something more upbeat. But in her narrative, she says, that's the so-and-so couple, blah, blah, blah. They died at 2:20, and then you go, what? So that would be maybe my only reference, is that I was using Our Town in that way.
In the process of making the film, or in the writing of the script, did you know how much you were ratcheting up the horror of it? I mean, it's like it almost seems like you step back and, like I said, it has this Exorcist-like effect of like you don't go in having a premise of what you're going to get, and it suddenly gets worse and worse and worse. Did you go, oh, let's add this in and let's make it even worse? Let's torture them even more.
What we did as we went along, you find a few things. You say, is it possible if we can do this? Because it's part of the fun of it. If you can, you're shooting fast and loose and whatever. But an added thing, for instance, I don't know. Oh, I know what it was. We had some. He was terrific. The guy who had to make some of the, I wouldn't call it puppetry, but he was able to do some things. And there's a thing where she's washing her face. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting if we have a guy who's lying there, you think he's dead on the other side, and they go around, and he had this eyeball or whatever. I said, could it just like the eye just move just a little? We'll just do that, and scares the shit out of her or whatever. And he said, yeah, we'll try that. All right, so we had a guy there, and then they put this head on him, and the eyeball just moved the slightest amount, and I went, oh, that's good, let's try that. So there was a couple times to say, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
Well, I was waiting for one of those things to jump on the baby. I'm surprised you didn't exploit the baby first. And was there a temptation?
No. I thought it was enough. Hopefully somebody goes, get the baby out of the car.
Well, one thing I noticed, because with all the found footage films that started coming out, they started almost repeating each other. And one thing I think that you did that I love is having instead of one camera that was found and showing that story, you took it from several different cameras and pieced it together. So it's several different people's story, not just like one group of people going through this town. And I think that's what really makes this film stand out as, I really enjoyed it as a really good film. Is that something was it written that way, or did you decide to just
No, it was designed that way.
It was? Okay.
As I was saying, there's all these different stories in this collection of all these cameras. And then some things evolved out. So for instance, the iPhone girl, originally she was supposed to, she says, look, I don't know what this is, or whatever, and that was the end of it. But I sent her in the room, as I said, I sent her into the room, I told her, I gave her some backstory, I said, just talk, like you got your friend, talk. And she talked, and I probably kept, 30 seconds of it, because it was better than that. And I said, she's so great, and because she's got a video camera, she has an iPhone, why don't I send her to the hospital, because that's where she's going to go anyway. And now I got another camera, so I'm at the hospital. Look what's going on here. So it allowed me to so we built up her role as we went along. And the funny thing is, I said to her one day, I said, I'd like to use you in another scene. And she went, well, I guess you should have seen that. So you're not that interested? She says, no, I'd like to, but I'm going to need a note from school.
Well, that girl also brought a lot of human emotion into it, because when she's talking to her friend, there's nothing else I can really say, but I don't want to be here by myself. She's when she was in the stairwell, and I thought that was just great, because it also brings that more meaningful emotion rather than just people that are running scared.
Well, that was part of the thing, as I said, when I thought, and found footage is certainly like the labeling devices. When you went past it, is that you would find these strange moments of just behavior that are completely outside of the box. No one had to be there to video her. She was there with her camera talking.
Right.
The intimacy of it. She doesn't understand what's really going on. And she just desperately wants to hold on to somebody.
And that was the other thing, because everyone, watching it knows what's going on.
Yeah.
But no one else does. And no one really does until kind of the end, when the reporter pieces it all together.
Yeah.
So that was pretty
if not Baltimore, you were at least going back to Maryland here, but ironically shot in South Carolina. If you had the opportunity, would you have shot in state, and what kept you from doing that?
Money.
Simple enough.
Because they didn't have the tax incentives, and South Carolina did. As it turned out, South Carolina was actually the perfect spot, because this town that we shot in was so accessible that rather than getting in the car and then driving to the location, we literally would walk over to here, and then we walk over to there, and we go around the corner to here, and we were able to move around so fast and do that the logistics of it were incredibly simple. And we found, one of the policemen told us, he said, well, there's this quarry that's got this water, and it's pretty clear, you can see under it, because we were wondering how we're going to do this underwater stuff. And that quarry turned out to be fantastic, and it was 5 minutes away. We pull up there, and we're able to jump into the water and do some of those things that otherwise you get into the Chesapeake, you can't see that far. You have to see a little bit more.
What movies have scared you?
In my lifetime?
Yeah, it could be a political film, but
I think the movie that scared me the most when I first saw it was The Thing, the original Thing.
the original.
Yes.
The original Thing, when they started to open the door and the hand came out, I remember as a kid going, whoa! And that just scared me to death. That was the first one. And the other thing, which was not a scary scene, but it was a very high-tension scene, and I remember seeing it as a kid on TV, because I didn't see it in the movie theater, was the original Frankenstein, when he comes upon the little girl.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a monster and a little girl. And I remember as a kid, and they're there, and he's sort of, oh my God, he's going to kill her, and he's playing with the thing or whatever. And I thought that was so fascinating that the monster's just like, "Ugh." You see this other moment of it, and then obviously then he ends up killing her. And you don't quite see it. And I remember as a kid thinking, that's really great, because it's not just the shock moment of it, it's like, what's going to happen? And I thought that was fantastic in that.
Now for the Bay, I mean, you got lucky with the logistics, everything from close, but there must have been a lot of planning because of all the different cameras you used before you started shooting. How long did that part of the process take for all of you to get that together?
It took a while, because they say we went through like 100 cameras. You know, we kept testing them, we would look at them, we would go, back into the screening room, we'd look at this, we would compare this camera to that camera. And so it was a whole thing. And then what do we do? What's going to work? The Google camera, the Google, phone's got this, got a colder temperature. This one's got this, and you're just whittling it down to those choices. And also trying to figure out what the reliability is going to be, because some of these cameras, didn't always hold up as well.
So when you were shooting, were you shooting, I guess, multiple cameras during the course of the day?
Oh yeah. Sometimes in scenes like in the pool party, with all these kids, probably there's like 7 cameras in there. Because I gave it to the kids. Hey, play with the kids, do with it. So you'll see the shots where it goes underwater and coming up, and it's all bizarre stuff. And what you have to do as a director, obviously a director's got to have control, but you also have to cede a certain amount of control to see what's going to happen. So you don't know what the hell some of that stuff is, and you can't examine every one of those cameras. You have to take it back and hope that you have something there, because you just don't have the time to go through every camera shot. So some of it is you don't know. And I have to tell you, when I was shooting that pool party, and these are all extras in South Carolina, and the kids are screaming or whatever, they were so good that I would just like sit back and watching, and it's weird because you don't have the camera where you're like, oh, okay, good take. You're watching all this stuff going on, and you're hoping that the people you gave cameras to are actually catching what's going on, because we can't cover it. We'll be in the way. So you've got those cameras, and you see these performances. It seemed about as real as I could imagine it to be. And then sometimes we would slip, Josh, our cinematographer, I'd slip him in assuming that I'm not going to get this and this, and then he would have to be equally as of an amateur as them. Otherwise, the camera's going to look better than the other. So you have to, deal with that. So sometimes he's got a finger on the lens, and if you look carefully, it just mess things up a bit.
So
that was the fun.
Break any of the cameras?
Oh, sure. No, we would lose a few things, and some cameras would jam and break. And as I say, sometimes they never shot. There was nothing.
Or drop in the water?
Well, in the water, we had these waterproof things would work, but things would happen. It was you have to be prepared that you're going to lose and something's going to go wrong, because you're playing with a degree of unknown.
Do you think it can affect change with this movie? Because it really emotionally affects you.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's what I would hope. It's one of the dilemmas of doing this kind of movie, where the studios want movies to be, well, it's a horror film, and you go, but it's not a pure horror film. And how do you define and whatever? And you go, well, look, it's a sci-fi thriller, horror, whatever. But it is what it is. I mean, you can't set out to be so defined as a genre for a selling tool. Can it affect anything? I don't know. I never know. Sometimes it is. All I know is you say Chesapeake Bay is 40% dead, and you can fix it, and you don't. And there's a million reasons why it's not taken care of. And so somebody said, well, is that going to upset the recreation departments and all that stuff? I don't know, but at some point you either don't say anything until it just tips over and it's all dead, or maybe somebody says something and they begin to do improvement. That's first obligation. You got to get people to see it, enjoy it, talk about it.
So the takeaway here is drink more bottled water. Are you in the pocket of big
You're helping
Poland's
Coca-Cola.
screen?
You're helping Coca-Cola
Only if the
and the
filter's
plastics manufacturers.
Exposed.
Sponsored by
Question about the logo at the end of the film in the last shot. It's very reminiscent of like the old '70s B movies and thrillers, stuff like that. Was that intentional, or was it just a cool design?
Well, you know what happened was, I think it was probably when we wanted to show it one day, and Aaron is my editor, and one of the other guys, David. I think that they were just screwing around on the final cut, just trying things. And said, well, that looks kind of nice, slightly kind of cheesy good, right? You know, and something about it. They literally been doing it, and I think that's where it came from. So I don't think we even went to a title house. I think between the two of them, they ended up with it. Which is one of the fun things about this radical shift that's taking place, that there's so many things you can play with now. And it's going to eventually change storytelling. You know, man, we are looking at probably the greatest revolution in the history of film is happening now. Classical forms have changed. The distribution patterns are going to be completely rearranged because you no longer have to carry all the cans into this place in order to see it. You know, the internets will be carrying all this information. You can see movies when you want to see movies, how you want to see movies, big screens, small screens. So this is, you know, we're looking at a giant, probably, you know, since the beginning of film. So it'll be an interesting time to see where it goes and how this all evolves. But think about in the past, there were people who had like stories, but you can't get that big camera. You can't get the giant camera. So now you take one of these and you can tell it in any crude way. Can you tell it better? You know, whatever. But it'll, you know, it's like pen and ink came along, and so I said, no, I'm sticking with carving into rock. That's where I am. I'm not changing.
Do you have one of those creatures as a plastic version?
I do. They gave me one of those. Yeah, my wife keeps hiding it. Let that thing off to death. They are
It would
absolutely
be great. You could throw it in the pool.
Yeah, throw it in.
Like when your kids are in there.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, the first time I
Party
showed
favors.
the first time I showed the movie, and a couple of friends said, I said, "Now the isopod is real." He said, "Really?" I said, "No, they're real. We didn't make them up." And I went, "Holy shit!" And then I thought, you know, something. I have to try to push this into the movie a little bit more. So you do it. So that's where we put all those isopod images, you know, that come up there, and the one that's 2.5 feet long and whatever. Just pushed it because initially we can't wrap our head around the fact that these things are out in the water and from a tiny parasite. Now, in the movie, there's a scene where he's holding the tweezer and he says, now this here is, you know, sometimes referred to sea lice and blah, blah, blah. Now that's not a special effect. That was the sea lice. We just pulled the fish out of South Carolina. We just pulled some fish out there and they got the sea lice on them, which is the early stages of the isopod. So that thing where he's holding it up with the little thing he's doing that's for real. We didn't have to CGI that. They were out there, sea lice.
So did you license them already to a toy company? Are we going to be able to get our own isopods?
This guy
That's a happy meal toy.
Party
Right?
favors.
thinking ahead.
I want them for party favors.
Animatronics, let them.
Nobody does that. No, I guess not.
But isn't that something? Now the one that crawls, that comes out of the fish is one that we have to CGI. That would you have to CGI.
That freaked me out.
Scribble living. Yeah.
But that one and the tweezer one, that's for real.
The CGI is nicely matched to the video here. Was it hard to get it all to all the pieces to fit like that?
Yeah, it was, because as I said to the CGI guys, I said, you know, in a lot of these movies, you know, the movie doesn't look that real to begin with, so it's okay, and we just accept it. But here, it looks like it's 100% real. So if these CGI things aren't spot on, we're dead. So we had to keep going back and playing to get it just, you know, so we can buy it.
So
Did the fact that you were kind of shooting degraded video help actually hide little flaws in the CG?
It did. Yeah, it did. It gave us a little bit of tweaking afterwards, and we'd beat it up a little bit. It would help.
You know, this actually fits your style of storytelling, especially like when I think you pioneered a form of storytelling, homicide work on the screen. It was just a pop show that we've never seen done in that style, and this is just like, it's part of like your style and extension.
I never sit down and figure it all out, but it probably has its things to it. The interesting thing about it in this form is that you have to have, we know it's a movie, and then inside of it we create our reality, and then you cannot screw with the reality unless if you want to knock it out. So for instance, like when the police go to the house and they go in, we can't go in because who's in there videoing this? There's nobody going to be videoing. So all we can do is we'll enhance the audio and hear the screaming and things or whatever, but we can't go in. And so it creates a certain frustration and anxiety. But if we went in, I think then we break.
It wouldn't be as scary.
Credibility.
So what do you do after a movie like this? What's next?
What's next is I'm in rehearsals for Diner the Musical.
Oh, of course.
That Sheryl Crow wrote the music, and we open in April.
You gonna see it in New York or is it?
No, it's in Broadway.
In Broadway, yeah, New York.
Yeah. So that's been going on for a long time, but that's actually in rehearsals right now. And
Scary.